All right, let's dive into a pretty complex chapter of American history, the story of Japanese-American immigration and the impact of World War II.
Sounds good.
We're going to cover a lot of ground here.
Okay.
From the early days of immigration back in the mid-1800s, all the way through to the fight for redress and recognition in the latter half of the 20th century.
Okay.
And as we go, you'll hear some unique terms pop up. I'd like to describe the different generations,
Oh,
Issei,
yeah.
Issei, Sansei, and Yonsei.
Right.
So think of these like markers helping us kind of track how experiences shifted across generations, born in Japan,
Right.
the U.S., and so on.
It's more than just labels, though, right? It kind of speaks to this
Right.
evolving relationship Japanese Americans have had with the U.S., this push and pull of identity and belonging in a country that wasn't always welcoming.
Exactly. So some big questions are going to come up.
Yeah.
Like, how did this community go from being sought after for their labor to facing such intense hostility?
Right.
What can we learn from their resilience in the face of all that?
Yeah.
And how does all of this connect to the immigration issues that, we see happening today?
It's not just a history lesson.
Right.
This deep dive will hopefully give you a new lens to view current events through, understand how these issues can, repeat themselves if we aren't careful.
Right. Okay, let's rewind all the way back to the mid-1800s.
Okay.
So Japan's modernizing at a rapid pace, and it created a lot of economic pressure.
Yeah.
And folks started looking for opportunities elsewhere.
It's important to remember that context, right? This wasn't just like a random wave of immigration.
Right.
It was a direct result of, global forces, internal changes within Japan itself.
Right.
And it's a pattern that you kind of see throughout history, right? People move when they're pushed by circumstance, whether it's poverty, persecution, all these things push people to move.
Right. And this wave of Japanese immigration was initially drawn to Hawaii for agricultural work. And it's a lot like what we saw with Chinese immigrants being recruited for railroad construction a little bit earlier.
And that's such a crucial parallel to draw because just a few years before that, in 1882, you have the Chinese Exclusion Act.
Right.
This was like the first major U.S. law to actually restrict immigration based on nationality.
Yeah.
And it was completely driven by this fear of, quote unquote, the other, right? Taking jobs, changing the social fabric. And it really laid the groundwork for the anti-Asian sentiment that would impact Japanese immigrants later on.
So even though the Japanese were initially welcome to fill labor needs, this kind of underlying current of xenophobia was already present.
Absolutely. And it gets even more complicated in 1907 with the Gentleman's Agreement. Because this wasn't like a formal law or anything, more of a handshake deal, really? Okay.
But it aimed to kind of limit Japanese labor immigration while allowing family reunification.
Okay.
So it's meant to ease tensions on the surface.
Yeah.
But it really reveals how deep-seated these anxieties about Japanese presence were, even though they were relatively small in number compared to European immigrants at the time.
It seems like perception played a huge role.
Oh, absolutely.
The fear was almost bigger than the reality of the situation.
Yeah, you see that reflected in this 1899 labor contract, where a portion of the workers' wages was actually withheld to cover return passage to Japan.
Wow.
It highlights how the U.S. government and employers really wanted to frame this as a temporary thing, not like a permanent settlement.
It's almost like they were saying, come do the work, but don't get too comfortable.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And this connects to a bigger picture, too.
Yeah.
This narrative of, quote unquote, temporary labor.
Right. It can be used to justify exploitation. And deny the potential for long-term contributions from people. It's a way of downplaying the human element, and upholding a system that benefits from, cheap, disposable labor.
That's a really insightful point.
Thank you.
And it makes you think about how often that same narrative has been used,
Totally.
throughout history and even today.
Absolutely. It's a recurring theme and one that we'll see kind of play out as we go further into this.
Right. Okay, so despite this undercurrent of prejudice and a sometimes, pretty hostile social climate, Japanese immigrants started building these vibrant communities in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
They didn't let these barriers stop them.
This period really showcases incredible resilience.
Yeah.
They were establishing cultural institutions, fighting for their rights in court, finding creative ways to just thrive within a system that's actively trying to limit them.
And they had to get creative.
Yeah.
They were dealing with things like the 1913 Alien Land Law in California.
Right.
This law specifically targeted Japanese immigrants, barring them from owning or leasing farmland.
It was a direct attack on their ability to build any sort of economic stability.
Exactly.
And how did they respond? By, forming their own cultural institutions, temples, shrines, schools, social groups.
Right.
They created spaces where they could preserve their heritage and support each other in the face of this discrimination.
They were determined to carve out a place for themselves.
Absolutely.
And they didn't shy away from legal battles either.
Nope.
I came across this really amazing story about 5 Issei doctors who fought so hard to establish a hospital for their community.
I love that story.
Yeah.
What's so inspiring about it is that it wasn't just about healthcare.
Right.
It was about challenging the very systems that were designed to marginalize them. It showed that they weren't going to just be passive victims, They were going to actively fight for their right to belong and to contribute.
They understood that access to healthcare was essential for the well-being of their community.
Yeah.
And they were willing to take on the establishment to make that happen.
Takes incredible courage to do that.
It does,
Especially in a climate where, anti-Japanese sentiment was so strong, and their ingenuity didn't stop there, right? They found ways to work around discriminatory laws, like purchasing land in the names of their American-born children.
It's amazing.
It shows how adaptable and determined they were to create a future for themselves and their families.
Right, and as this new generation, the Nisei, came of age, they faced this unique challenge of navigating their dual identities, being American citizens, but also carrying the legacy of their immigrant parents and the prejudice that they faced.
That's key.
Because they become this bridge between two cultures, right? Advocating for their community while also trying to carve out their own space in American society.
Right.
It's a tension that so many immigrant communities still grapple with today.
It is. And this tension was about to be amplified in a really dramatic way with the 1924 Immigration Act, which was specifically designed to halt Japanese immigration altogether.
This act is such a stark reminder of how fear and prejudice can so quickly translate into exclusionary policies. It closed the door on Japanese immigration for decades.
Wow.
Fractured families, further isolated the Japanese American community. It's a chilling echo of that Chinese Exclusion Act we talked about earlier. And it reveals just this deeply ingrained pattern of prejudice in American immigration policy.
It seems like every time the Japanese American community took a step forward, there was another setback.
Another obligation.
Waiting just around the corner. And unfortunately, the biggest one was yet to come.
Right, because next up is this event that would change the course of history for Japanese Americans forever.
Right.
The attack on Pearl Harbor.
It's hard to overstate the impact of that event. Right? Suddenly, decades of contributions, peaceful integration, all of that's erased from public consciousness pretty much overnight.
It's heartbreaking to see how quickly fear and propaganda can turn a nation against its own citizens.
It's a reminder of how fragile civil liberties can be, especially in times of crisis, It raises all these questions about the responsibility of leaders and the media to really combat that fear and uphold basic principles of justice and equality, even when it's hard.
Right. It seems like the stage was set for a tragic overreaction.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly what we got with Executive Order 9066.
One of the darkest chapters in American history.
Issued by President Roosevelt in 1942. This order led to the establishment of exclusion zones on the West Coast.
Targeted people of Japanese ancestry, regardless of citizenship.
Regardless of citizenship.
This was a blatant violation of civil liberties. It was fueled by racial prejudice, unfounded fears of, espionage, sabotage. And it's vital to compare the treatment of Japanese Americans to that of, German and Italian immigrants during the war. The fact that Japanese Americans were singled out, even those who were born in the U.S., never even been to Japan, exposes the, explicitly racialized nature of this policy.
It's a reminder that citizenship doesn't always guarantee equal treatment.
Unfortunately.
Or protection under the law.
Right.
And what's even more alarming is the lack of widespread outcry against this injustice.
The silence of so many during this period is a chilling reminder of the dangers of complacency and the power dynamics at play, right?
Yeah.
It underscores the importance of speaking out against injustice,
Yeah.
The responsibility of all citizens to protect the rights of others, even in those times of fear and uncertainty.
It's almost unfathomable how quickly this forced removal and incarceration unfolded.
It happened so fast.
Japanese Americans were given mere days to dispose of their belongings, close down businesses, prepare for an unknown future.
When they're not actively defended. It's easy to get caught up in the broad strokes of history, the dates, the names. But for me, it's the individual stories, the human cost of these policies that really bring it home.
Absolutely.
We need to grapple with the experiences of those who were unjustly imprisoned, the trauma they endured, and the resilience they displayed in the face of unimaginable hardship.
Absolutely. And speaking of those individual experiences, let's talk about the realities of life inside these hastily built internment camps.
Right. They weren't just like temporary holding facilities. They were designed to isolate and control an entire population based solely on their ancestry.
Yeah, the physical conditions were deplorable.
Oh, absolutely.
Families crammed into these cramped, poorly constructed barracks.
Often lacking like the most basic necessities, privacy, adequate heating, proper sanitation. These camps were scattered across the country, in these desolate locations, each with its own like set of challenges, extremes of climate.
It's hard to imagine the psychological toll of being imprisoned without cause, stripped of your freedom, your dignity, forced to live in this constant state of uncertainty.
The trauma of that internment experience had a profound and lasting impact on Japanese Americans. Many struggled with, feelings of shame, anger, loss for decades after the war.
It's amazing that anyone could find the strength to resist and maintain their spirit in such a dehumanizing environment.
It really is.
But some did, right?
They did.
You mentioned something earlier about a group of young men who resisted the draft while they were in the camps.
The Heart Mountain Fair Play Committee, powerful example of resistance and the complexities of loyalty during wartime. These young Nisei men refused to be drafted into the military as long as their families remained unjustly incarcerated.
They were essentially saying, how can we be expected to fight for a country that is imprisoning our families based solely on our ancestry? That's such a bold and principled stand.
Oh, it was.
Especially considering that they were facing potential imprisonment for their actions.
Absolutely. Their resistance sparked this heated debate within the Japanese American community and in broader American society too about what it actually meant to be a loyal citizen.
It forces you to think about, the nature of loyalty and what it means to be a true patriot. Is it blind obedience? Or is it about holding your country accountable to its ideal, even when it's difficult? And the story of the Heart Mountain Fair Play Committee becomes even more powerful when you juxtapose it with the service of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team.
Incredible.
This segregated unit made up entirely of Japanese American soldiers.
So many of whom volunteered from the camps. Incredible.
Fought with extraordinary courage and distinction in Europe.
He did.
They became one of the most decorated units for its size and length of service in U.S. military history. Talk about a testament to their loyalty and their determination.
Inspiring and tragic at the same time, You have these young men risking their lives for a country that imprison their family, proving their patriotism in the face of unimaginable prejudice.
It's so complex and nuanced.
It highlights these deep contradictions at the heart of American society during this period. Like, it makes us confront that gap between our stated ideals and the reality of how we actually treat those who are perceived as, you know, different or threatening. And on top of all of that, the 522nd Field Artillery Battalion, part of the 442nd, actually helped liberate a Nazi concentration camp in Europe.
Can you imagine the emotional weight of that experience?
It's hard to even fathom.
Freeing prisoners of war while your own family is unjustly imprisoned.
Speaks volumes about their resilience,
it does.
Their strength, their commitment to fighting for justice, even while enduring such profound injustice themselves.
It's a stark reminder that even in the darkest of times, there are individuals and groups who rise above the hate and the prejudice to demonstrate extraordinary courage and compassion.
Absolutely.
But as the war came to an end, the Japanese-American community faced yet another set of challenges as they tried to rebuild their lives.
They returned to a society that was still deeply divided, suspicious of them. They'd lost their homes, businesses, their sense of belonging. Many faced discrimination in housing, employment, education, you name it.
It's hard to imagine the strength and resilience it took.
That's incredible.
Pick up the pieces and start over after such a traumatic experience.
They did rebuild their lives, though, They formed new communities, established businesses, raised families. They refused to be defined by the injustice they had suffered.
It's a testament to the enduring spirit of the Japanese-American community.
Absolutely.
But the fight for justice and recognition was far from over.
It would take decades of activism and advocacy to achieve even a semblance of redress for the wrongs that had been committed.
The Walter McCarran Act of 1952 was, I guess, a small step forward.
Small step,
It finally granted Issei, the first generation of Japanese immigrants, the right to naturalization, allowing them to become U.S. citizens.
It's almost unbelievable that it took that long for them to be granted that basic.
It highlights the long shadow cast by the internment experience.
Absolutely.
And it was the Sansei generation, was born after the war, who really took up the mantle of fighting for justice and redress.
They grew up hearing their parents' and grandparents' stories, and they were determined to ensure that such a travesty would never happen again.
They refused to let history be swept under the rug.
They did not.
They organized. They protested.
They demanded that the government acknowledge the wrongs that had been committed.
And those efforts led to the establishment of the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians, or CWRIC, in 1980.
Big step.
This commission held hearings all across the country, gathering testimonies from former internees.
Powerful testimonies. They brought the human cost of the internment to life.
They did. They gave a voice to the pain, the loss, the resilience of those who had endured this injustice.
And the work of CWRIC paved the way for the landmark Civil Liberties Act of 1988.
Huge.
Signed by President Reagan, offering a formal apology and reparations to surviving internees.
It was a long overdue acknowledgement of the government's wrongdoing.
A small step towards healing the wounds of the past.
It's incredible to think about how far the Japanese-American community has come since those dark days of World War II. They rebuilt their lives, they fought for recognition, and they achieved a measure of justice.
They did.
But it's also a stark reminder that the fight for equality and the protection of civil liberties is an ongoing process.
Absolutely.
One that requires constant vigilance. And a willingness to challenge systems of oppression.
Wherever they exist.
Wherever they exist.
The story of Japanese-American internment isn't just a historical footnote, you know? It's a living legacy that continues to shape our understanding of citizenship belonging. And just how fragile our rights can be.
They are fragile.
In the face of fear and prejudice. And it holds these really profound lessons for us today as we deal with all these contemporary challenges that echo the injustices of the past.
One of the most important lessons, I think, is the danger of silence.
Oh, for sure.
in the face of injustice.
Absolutely.
We can't afford to be bystanders when we see the rights of others being violated.
It doesn't matter what it's based on.
Yeah.
Race, religion, ethnicity, anything.
Right.
We all have a responsibility to speak out, to challenge prejudice and discrimination wherever we encounter it.
Silence is often interpreted as complicity.
It is.
Right.
Yeah. And it can embolden those who are seeking to exploit and marginalize others.
Right. And we need to remember that our rights are interconnected.
They are.
When the rights of one group are threatened,
the
rights of all are at risk.
That's right.
It's like that famous quote from Martin Niemöller.
Oh, yeah.
First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out.
Because I was not a socialist.
Because I was not a socialist.
Right.
Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out.
Because I was not a trade unionist.
Because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out.
Because I was not a Jew.
Because I was not a Jew.
Yeah.
Then they came for me.
And there was no one left to speak for me.
And there was no one left to speak for me.
Chilling reminder.
It is.
Of the consequences of apathy and inaction.
We need to be active participants.
We do.
In safeguarding our democracy.
Absolutely.
On protecting the rights of all citizens.
And that requires us to be informed. Yeah. To engage in meaningful dialogue. Right. And to hold our leaders accountable.
Right.
You know?
It's easy to feel overwhelmed.
Oh, yeah.
By the scale of these issues.
Sure.
But individual actions can make a difference.
They can.
We can start by educating ourselves about the history of injustice in our own communities, supporting organizations that are working to promote equality and social justice.
And we can challenge prejudice and discrimination in our daily lives, too.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Whether it's in conversations with friends and family or in our workplaces and communities, it can be as simple as speaking up. When someone makes a racist or discriminatory remark, or supporting businesses and organizations that are committed to diversity and inclusion.
It's important to remember that the fight for justice and equality, it's not a destination.
Yeah.
It's a journey.
It's a journey.
There will be setbacks. Yeah. There will be challenges along the way.
Absolutely.
But we can't afford to lose hope or become complacent.
The story of Japanese American internment is a reminder that progress is possible.
Yeah.
Even in the face of, like, seemingly insurmountable obstacles.
It's a testament to the power of resilience.
It is.
The importance of community and that enduring hope for a more just and equitable future.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's hard to wrap your head around it, you know.
It is.
The sheer scale of the injustice.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like a few isolated incidents.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking about the forced relocation and imprisonment of over 120,000 people.
Right.
Based solely on their ancestry.
And what's even more striking is how quickly this unfolded, right?
Yeah.
Within months of Pearl Harbor, Executive Order 9066 was signed.
Right.
Families were given just days to pack up their lives and report to these assembly centers.
It's almost like the government was just caught up in this wave of panic and fear. Yeah. And they acted without any, like, real regard for due process or basic human rights.
That's a really important point.
Yeah.
The internment wasn't just about, like, wartime security.
Right.
It was about racial prejudice
Yeah.
and this deep-seated fear of the quote-unquote other.
Mm-hmm.
And we see this reflected in the language that was used by government officials and the media at the time,
Right.
often dehumanizing Japanese Americans, portraying them as a threat to national security.
It's a chilling reminder of how propaganda and fear-mongering can be used to justify even the most egregious violations of civil liberties.
Absolutely. And the irony of it all is that despite these fears, there was never any evidence of, like, widespread espionage or sabotage by Japanese Americans.
In fact, many of them were fiercely loyal to the United States.
Absolutely.
And eager to prove their patriotism.
Which brings us to the experience of those who were actually incarcerated in these camps.
Right.
I've read accounts of families being forced to live in these, like, cramped, unsanitary barracks, often with very little privacy or access to basic necessities.
They weren't just temporary holding facilities.
No, these were designed to isolate and control.
Right.
The physical conditions were often deplorable.
Yeah.
Families enduring extreme temperatures.
Yeah.
inadequate medical care, limited access to education, cultural activities.
It's hard to fathom
the
psychological toll this must have taken on people.
Yeah. Imagine being stripped of your freedom, your dignity, your sense of belonging, all because of your ancestry.
The trauma of that internment experience had a profound and lasting impact on Japanese Americans. Many struggling with feelings of shame, anger, and loss for decades after the war.
Yeah, it's amazing that anyone could find the strength to resist and to maintain their spirit in such a dehumanizing environment.
But some did.
They did. Yeah.
Did you mention something earlier about a group of young men who resisted the draft while they were in the camps?
The Heart Mountain Fair Play Committee. A really powerful example of resistance. And the complexities of loyalty during wartime. These young Nisei men, they refused to be drafted into the military as long as their families remained unjustly incarcerated. They argued that, they couldn't be expected to fight for a country that was denying them these basic freedoms and treating them like, enemy aliens.
It's such a bold and principled stand, especially considering that they were facing, potential imprisonment for their actions.
Absolutely. Their resistance sparked this huge debate, within the Japanese American community and in broader American society, too, about what it actually meant to be a loyal citizen.
It makes you think about the nature of loyalty. What it means to be a true patriot.
Totally.
Is it blind obedience? Or is it about holding your country accountable to its ideal?
To its ideals.
Even when it's really difficult.
Even when it's hard.
And the story of the Heart Mountain Fair Play Committee becomes even more powerful, I think, when you kind of put it next to the service of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team.
It's incredible.
This segregated unit made up entirely of Japanese American soldiers.
Many of whom volunteered from the camps themselves. Just incredible.
They fought with extraordinary courage and distinction in Europe.
They did.
I remember reading that they became one of the most decorated units.
They did.
For its size and length of service. In U.S. military history. Talk about a testament to their loyalty and determination.
It's both inspiring and tragic at the same time, You have these young men risking their lives for a country that had imprisoned their families. Proving their patriotism in the face of just unimaginable prejudice.
Such a complex and nuanced part of the story.
It highlights these really deep contradictions at the heart of American society during this period, right? It forces us to confront that gap between our stated ideals and the reality of how we treat those who are perceived as different or threatening.
And as if their service wasn't enough.
Oh, man.
The 522nd Field Artillery Battalion, a part of the 442nd, actually helped liberate a Nazi concentration camp in Europe. Can you imagine?
It's hard to even fathom
the emotional weight of that experience. Freeing prisoners of war while your own family is unjustly imprisoned.
It speaks volumes about their resilience, their strength, their commitment to fighting for justice, even while enduring such profound injustice themselves.
It's a stark reminder that even in the darkest of times, there are individuals and groups who rise above the hate and the prejudice to demonstrate this incredible courage and compassion.
They do.
But as the war came to an end, the Japanese American community faced yet another set of challenges as they attempted to rebuild their lives.
They returned to a society that was, still deeply divided and suspicious of them.
They lost their homes, businesses, their sense of belonging. Many faced discrimination in housing, employment, education.
It's hard to imagine the strength and resilience it took to pick up the pieces and start over after such a traumatic experience.
And yet they did.
But they did. They rebuilt their lives.
They
formed new communities, established businesses, raised families. They refused to be defined by the injustice they had suffered.
It's a testament to the enduring spirit.
It really is.
Of the Japanese American community. But the fight for justice and recognition was far from over.
Yeah, it would take decades of activism and advocacy to achieve even a semblance of redress for the wrongs that had been committed.
And the Walter McCarran Act of 1952 was, I guess you could say, like a small step forward.
Small step, yeah.
It finally granted Issei, the first generation of Japanese immigrants, the right to naturalization, allowing them to become U.S. citizens.
Yeah, it's almost unbelievable that it took that long. It is for them to be granted that basic right.
It really highlights the long shadow cast by the internment experience.
Totally.
And it was the Sansei generation, those born after the war, who really took up this
they did
mantle of fighting for justice and redress.
They grew up hearing their parents' and grandparents' stories, right?
Right.
And they were determined to ensure that such a travesty would never happen again.
They refused to let history be swept under the rug.
Absolutely.
They organized, they protested, they demanded that the government acknowledge the wrongs that had been committed.
Absolutely. And those efforts led to the establishment of the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians.
Right, or CWRI.
CWRIC, yeah.
In 1980.
Huge step.
This commission held hearings across the country.
They gathered all these testimonies from former internees and documented the devastating impact of the internment.
Those testimonies were incredibly powerful. They brought the human cost of the internment to life.
They did.
Giving voice to the pain, the loss, the resilience.
The resilience.
Of those who endured this injustice.
And the work of CWRIC paved the way for the landmark Civil Liberties Act of 1988.
Right, signed by President Reagan.
Offering a formal apology and reparations to surviving internings.
It was long overdue.
It was.
But it was an acknowledgement of the government's wrongdoing.
A small step towards healing the wounds of the past.
The Civil Liberties Act stands as a testament to the power of perseverance and the importance of confronting the darkest chapters of our history.
It serves as this reminder that we have to remain vigilant in safeguarding civil liberties and upholding the principles of justice and equality.
It's a reminder that the fight for justice is an ongoing process.
It is.
One that requires
constant vigilance.
And a willingness to challenge
systems of oppression
wherever they exist.
And
it's a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable hardship, the human spirit can endure and even triumph. The Japanese-American experience is a testament to the power of resilience, the importance of community, and the enduring hope for a more just and equitable future.
Yeah, it really makes you think, about how far they've come.
It does.
Since those dark days of World War II. I mean, they rebuilt their lives, they fought for recognition, they achieved, at least some measure of justice.
They did.
But it's also a stark reminder that this fight for equality, for the protection of civil liberties.
Absolutely.
It's an ongoing process.
It is.
It requires constant vigilance. Willingness to challenge these systems of oppression.
Wherever they exist.
Wherever we see them.
The story of Japanese-American internment is not just a historical footnote,
It's not.
It's a living legacy.
Right.
And it continues to shape our understanding of citizenship, belonging, and just how fragile our rights can be.
They are fragile.
In the face of fear and prejudice.
Yeah, and it holds these really profound lessons for us today.
It does.
As we face these contemporary challenges.
Absolutely.
That echo the injustices of the past.
I think one of the most important lessons is the danger of silence.
Right.
In the face of injustice.
Right.
We can't afford to be bystanders.
No.
When we see the rights of others being violated.
Whether it's based on,
Doesn't matter what it's based on.
Race, religion,
ethnicity.
We all have a responsibility.
Yeah, we have to speak out. To challenge prejudice and discrimination wherever we encounter it.
Silence is often interpreted as complicity.
It is.
And it can embolden.
It does.
Those who seek to exploit and marginalize others.
And we need to remember that our rights are interconnected.
They are.
When the rights of one group are threatened, the rights of all are at risk.
That's right.
It's like that famous quote, right?
Oh, yeah.
From Martin Niemöller.
Yeah.
First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out.
Because I was not a socialist.
Because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out.
Because I was not a trade unionist.
Because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out.
Because I was not a Jew.
Because I was not a Jew, and they came for me.
And there was no one left to speak for me.
And there was no one left to speak for me.
Chilling reminder.
It is.
Of the consequences of apathy and inaction.
We need to be active participants.
Absolutely.
In safeguarding our democracy.
Yeah.
And protecting the rights of all citizens.
And that requires us to be informed, you know?
Right.
Engage in meaningful dialogue.
Yeah.
Hold our leaders accountable, you know?
It's easy to feel overwhelmed.
Oh, for sure.
By the scale of these issues.
Absolutely.
But, you know, individual actions can make a difference.
They do.
We can start by, you know, educating ourselves about the history of injustice in our own communities and supporting organizations that are working to promote equality.
Absolutely. And social justice.
We can challenge prejudice and discrimination in our daily lives, too.
In our everyday lives.
Whether it's in, you know, conversations with friends and family or in our workplaces and communities.
Yeah.
You know, it can be as simple as, like, speaking up when someone makes a racist or discriminatory remark.
Right.
Or supporting, you know, businesses and organizations that are committed to diversity and inclusion.
Yeah. It's important to remember, right, that this fight for justice and equality, it's not a destination, it's a journey.
It's a journey.
And there will be setbacks.
There will be challenges along the way.
For sure.
But we just can't afford to lose hope.
You know.
Or become complacent.
The story of Japanese American internment is a reminder that progress is possible.
It is.
Even in the face of, like, seemingly insurmountable obstacles.
Right.
It's a testament to the power of resilience, the importance of community, and that enduring hope for a more just and equitable future.
So as we reflect on this complex and often, you know, painful chapter of American history, I hope it inspires us to be, you know, more engaged citizens.
Oh, absolutely.
To challenge injustice wherever we see it.
Wherever we see it.
And to work toward creating a society where all people are treated with dignity and respect.
We can honor the legacy of those who endured the injustice of internment, you know, by committing ourselves to this ongoing pursuit of a more perfect union.
Yeah.
One that truly embodies the principles of liberty and justice for all.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the history of Japanese American immigration and internment.
It was my pleasure.
It's a story that has resonated with me deeply, and I hope it has for you as well.